I thought that I would give a review for the movie Longlegs because the movie was, I think it was a breath of fresh air. I think the film was a breath of fresh air in comparison to just the slop of films that we've been getting for years that aren't really very good. Movies like The Nun, The Nun 2, some movie about an exorcist that's just the same old trope that we've been seeing for decades. Longlegs was a very good horror movie. It was. It had an excellent atmosphere. And I think the most important aspect to any movie is its atmosphere. The atmosphere has to fit the story. And if the atmosphere does not fit the story, the movie feels off. It doesn't feel good, doesn't feel smooth, doesn't feel whole. It doesn't feel satisfying at all. It has to fit the story. And if you have, for example, a movie that calls itself a horror movie and the atmosphere is bright, the texture is bright, the colors are bright, and everything is bright, and the actors don't really look like the types of people that would be in such a situation. It doesn't fit, and the acting sucks, and the lines are cringe and awkward, and things just feel out of place, and everything feels rushed, and the scares feel rushed, and the scares feel cheap, and everything feels like it's forced and pushed. Then the movie is garbage. But if the timing is realistic, if the timing feels right, there's good pacing, and if the atmosphere fits the story, then the story, for the most part, will be good. If you have a good texture, and the texture is dim, and the texture is somewhat dark, and the texture just bespeaks dreariness and sadness, and it bespeaks and if it forebodes something bad, then the story fits and it makes the story shine. It's like seasoning to food. It's like you see a painting that depicts something that happened in the 30 Years' War. Well, back in those days, in the 17th century, when they did paintings, they made sure that the texture fit the story or fit what the painting was depicting. And in the case of the 30 Years' War, if you see paintings that depict horrifying events that took place in that conflict, you'll notice that the colors, the texture are dreary. They're dreary and they fit the event. They fit what the painting is depicting. Same thing with horror movies. Same thing with any movie, really. When you watch Saving Private Ryan, what's the texture in Saving Private Ryan? It's dim, it's dreary, it's ominous. It's just the texture just forebodes a nightmare. When you watch Come and See, the Soviet movie from 1990, I believe 1995, which was a masterpiece, Come and See, the movie. Come and See was such a masterful work, but the texture of the film, the taint of the movie really fits the story. When you watch Braveheart, I mean, what kind of tint do you get with Braveheart? It just fits the story. You get that 1990s tint, and it just matches very well with the story, and it's gritty, and it's dreary, and it's grisly. Braveheart. Black Hawk Down, the same thing. The tint, the color, the texture fits the story. So when you watch Longlegs, the texture fit the story. And so many horror films have a texture that doesn't match with the story. You watch a lot of these horror films today with their cheap scares, and the texture is just off. It's just too bright. I don't like movies that have overly bright colors. And the actors that they pick for a lot of these horror movies they just don't fit. You know, there's a certain face for every story, and certain actors are better for certain roles. Jim Carrey can't really play a serious role. Denzel Washington can't really play a villain that well. Tom Hanks definitely can't play a villain. Because why? Because these types of roles don't really fit these actors' particular personalities. So actors have, every actor has a personality or a set of personalities that are really good for a certain role or certain roles. So, for example, there's that Lewis guy who played in There Will Be Blood, and that guy plays an excellent villain. The guy who played Colonel Tavington in The Patriot, he plays a really good villain. Sir Mel Gibson can't play a good villain. Mel Gibson just can't do it. He plays a really good hero. He plays a really good leader. Same thing with Tom Hanks. So there's certain actors who are really good for certain roles because those actors themselves have particular personalities, or they have a personality that fits certain roles or a particular specific role because it's in them. Like Denzel Washington plays a really good hero, or he plays a really good leader, because in his own life, he has the personality of a leader. Tom Hanks can play a really good leader. You see him in Castaway, where he's directing all these Russians in the FedEx building, and he's just leading all these employees, and he's encouraging them, and he's getting them up, he's riling them up, he's getting them to work, he's pushing them, because he could probably do that in real life, or it's in him to play that particular job, or to work within that particular job. It's in him himself. Lewis is a villain because part of him is villainous. Joaquin Phoenix is a villain because a part of him is villainous in real life. It fits their personalities. When you look at Longlegs, just the texture fits the story, and I think the actors do a really good job. The female FBI agent who plays the main character in the movie, she reminds me a lot of Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs. And as I was watching the movie, I immediately began to see parallels with Silence of the Lambs, especially in the beginning of the movie. The film definitely has an influence from Silence of the Lambs, but it also has an influence from a particular Japanese film that I saw some years ago. This Japanese movie is about a guy who can tell people who can hypnotize people to kill people, and that's what Longlegs does. Longlegs uses the occult to possess people, to get them to do evil things. In the case of the film, it's mass murder. And so the FBI, all these FBI agents, they're really confused. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to think, because they see all these murders happening and they don't know who's committing them, because there's no sign of someone breaking into the homes where these families are being butchered. So they assume maybe it's a cult. Maybe there's a whole bunch of different members of this cult who are doing this, but they can't figure it out because there's no evidence of these homes being broken into. So what's going on? It's almost like the villain is within the house the whole time. And the villain is within the house the entire time. The villain is the demonic realm. And the demonic realm influences these people to do evil, which is what the demonic realm does in real life. But in the movie, this Longlegs guy, he uses magic to possess people. And does that happen in real life? No, it doesn't. That's not how the demonic realm works. But, in a Hollywood setting, in a movie setting, it does make for an interesting story. But I like the music in the movie. The music really fits the story. The music really fits the atmosphere. Like I said, the atmosphere is very dreary. The music is very dreary. There's a point in the movie where you'll actually hear a Scandinavian-style violin in the background, which is really fitting, really does work for this type of movie. It's scary, dreary. It's a great film to watch on a rainy night. And I watched this film, I'm not going to lie, guys, I watched this movie at about 3 or 4 in the morning with most of the lights off. And it was a crazy experience, not a crazy experience, but it was a cool experience. It was a sort of a eerie, spooky experience. This would be a great film to watch around Halloween when all the leaves in the trees are off, they're on the ground, or there's, the trees have a few leaves left on them, and maybe it's a really cloudy afternoon, and maybe it rained, which is even better, and then it's nighttime and now it's raining, and that's even better. And then you watch the movie, and then it's kind of cold outside. This is the movie for that. Perfect film for that. I would say this is the best horror film that I have seen since I saw Hereditary back in 2018, which was an excellent horror movie. So yes, Longlegs, really good. The guy who directed Longlegs is the same guy who directed The Blackcoat's Daughter, which for me is one of the best horror films that I've ever seen. Blackcoat's Daughter is a very underrated horror movie. And Longlegs has a very similar style to The Blackcoat's Daughter. I really enjoyed the supporting character. He's an FBI captain, commander, something like that. He does a really good job as a supporting character. He's trying to get to the bottom of it as well, and he has a really cool voice. He's got that Navy accelerate your life type of voice from the old Navy commercials. He's always wondering how this woman FBI agent is so good at doing investigative work, and he's like, "How do you do it, Harper? How do you do it?" And she's like, I studied the files, sir. And she's sort of this, she has this, the woman FBI agent in the film, she has this quiet, strong aura about her. I'm guessing that's the type of feeling that they wanted to convey to the audience in regards to this character. She has this feeling, when you look at her, you get the impression that she's timid, but at the same time, there's a lot of internal strength within her, which is nice to see in a character. She's not a super, super tough person, but at the same time, she has enough of a degree of courage to do something that a lot of us wouldn't want to do. The villain in Longlegs is a tranny. I am not joking. Straight up, the villain is trans. Obviously influenced by Silence of the Lambs. What made Silence of the Lambs so damn creepy was the fact that the killer wore a dress. I mean, that shit's creepy. Because I've talked about this before. What makes us scared? We are scared of the unnatural. So, for example, smiling, right? It's natural for us to smile because something good has happened. It's not natural for us to smile when somebody has been cut to pieces. But Ted Bundy smiled. And that makes Ted Bundy a hell of a lot scarier because not only was he a serial killer, but he smiled about it. And he grinned. There's something very creepy about that, right? Something very creepy about that. So there's something very creepy about a man wearing a dress. Why? Because naturally women wear dresses. I don't have to explain to you why. That's just how it is. That's just how it be. And here you got men walking around with dresses, and they know damn well what they're doing is weird. So you watch Silence of the Lambs, and he's got that creepy-ass music playing, and he's doing that weird-ass dance. And it's hella creepy. So you look at Longlegs. Longlegs, the villain in this movie, dresses up like a woman. That shit's creepy. It's creepy. It's terrifying. It's the creepiest part about him, other than him being a cultic murderer, of course. But what makes it even creepier is just how he walks around with a dress, and he's got like lipstick on, and he puts cosmetics on, and it's very dark stuff. It's very, very dark. And you think, well, that's just all Hollywood nonsense. No, it's not. No, it ain't. Have you guys ever heard of Dennis Rader? That guy used to wear dresses. Horrifying. Absolutely horrifying stuff. Here's another thing. Oh, yeah, you can find this in history, everyone. You can find this in history. Josephus. I keep telling people to read this book. Josephus's book on the Roman-Judean War. The name of the book is called, I think, The War of the Jews or something like that. Josephus's history on the Roman-Jewish War, at times, it kind of reads like a horror movie. Why do I say this? There's a scene in Josephus's history. There's a part in Josephus's history where he's talking about what happened after the Zealots took over Jerusalem. So there was this sectarian war happening between the Jews. And there was a sectarian war between the high priests and the Zealots. The Zealots were a faction that were founded by a guy named Judas of Galilee. And Judas of Galilee, he started a revolutionary movement that basically said that religious Jews, Jewish people, don't have to pay taxes to the Roman government because the Roman government is not Jewish. So they started a revolution. Now that faction, it continued on for a long time, and it became one of the leading factions in the Roman Jewish revolt. Initially, the revolt was led by people who were in the high priestly class, so people like Hanan ben Hanan. These were people who really led the revolution initially. Eliezer ben Hananiah was another one. Eliezer ben Hananiah was the governor of the temple. And what he decreed actually commenced the whole war. He said that no sacrifice shall ever be done for foreigners, including the Caesar himself. Caesar got wind of this, and he said that's a declaration of war, and the war commences. So the war commences because of racism, hatred towards foreigners. And eventually what happens is that there is a conflict between the Sadducees, led by people like Hanan ben Hanan, and the Zealots, led by people such as Yohanan ben Gishkalla or Yohanan ben Lawi, and I think other people also within that faction. I think the name of another Zealot leader was a man by the name of Zechariah ben Falak. Anyway, these were all Zealots, and the Zealots wanted to control all of Jerusalem, and they wanted to control all the temple. They wanted to kill the high priest. They wanted to kill the leaders who were a little bit more moderate than they were, because there came a point when the writing on the wall was quite clear that the Jews were going to lose the war, and so some of the initial rebel leaders like like Hanan ben Hanan. They wanted to make a peace deal with the Romans. Zealots didn't want that. They called these people traitors. And eventually what happened was the Zealots, they didn't really control fully the temple. They wanted to control the temple from the Sadducees. So what happened? The Zealots said, okay, well, we have our allies who are Arab Jews, and the Arab Jews will come in, and the Arab Jews will do a lot of the killing for us. So they send a letter to the Arab Jews over there in Jordan, what they call Idumea in those days, and they said, these people who are controlling the temple, they're going to give the temple up to the Romans, and they're going to basically prostitute the temple to Goyim, to Gentiles, which was a blasphemous thing to do for them. So the Arab Jews, about 20,000 of them on horseback or camelback, I'm not entirely certain, but about 20,000 Arab warriors went to Jerusalem. They entered the city, they stormed the temple, and they butchered everyone that they could find. And they took the high priest Hanan ben Hanan, who was the son of the guy who was the head conspirator against Jesus, Mr. Hanan himself. They took Hanan ben Hanan, they killed him, they they stomped on his dead body with their feet, and they took his body, and according to Josephus, they threw his corpse outside of the temple so that it may be eaten by dogs. The Zealots took over Jerusalem. They defeated the Sadducees, they defeated their factional enemy, and they took over Jerusalem. And when they took over Jerusalem, there is this moment that sounds almost like a horror movie. The Zealots are running rampant, and they're just butchering everyone. They're just killing people. It's just chaos. It's lawless. And Josephus says that the Zealots, they began to dress up like women. The men began to dress up like women, and they began to sodomize each other and do all sorts of disgusting things with each other. And Jerusalem became Sodom, going back to what John says in the book of Revelation, that place where our Lord was crucified, which is now Egypt and Sodom. And you read the words of Josephus, and Josephus is just going on and on about this. You know, how they just killed and put dresses on, and they walked like women, and they made all of Jerusalem into a sodomite brothel, and they got possessed. It was just massive demonic hysteria. And you read that and you think, wow, it's like a horror movie. It really is like a horror movie, guys. So you can find horror in nonfiction. And, of course, nonfiction is scarier than any fictional movie or book because it's real.